Hello students, today we will be talking about a new theory in international relations that is called feminism. In the previous lecture we talked about constructivism as a new theory in international relations. So there are some similarities between constructivism and feminism. Both originated in the early 1990s and both were very critical about the mainstream theories. But despite this similarity, both these theories they are dissimilar in an important respect that feminism particularly focuses on gender as a typology for understanding international relations, whereas constructivism basically talks about the social construction of reality. There are constructivist feminists who are influenced by the main assumptions of constructivism, but feminism is particularly interested for understanding international politics by using gender as a typology or gender as a parameter for understanding global politics. So in this lecture we will be talking of feminism as a concept, as an approach, and basically we will look at the various kinds of approaches used in feminism. So how we will proceed, we will basically be looking at the background of feminism, then we will be talking about the main concepts, then we will be talking of different waves of feminism, then there are different approaches like the liberal feminism, socialist and Marxist feminism, then radical feminism, we will be talking of postmodern feminism, then constructivist feminism, then post-colonial feminism, and then we will be also talking about the cultural feminism. So let us start with the background, why this theory, how it emerged as an alternative theory to the mainstream theories in international relations. So the study of international politics has traditionally been gender blind. In a discipline that focused primarily on states and interstate relations, sexual politics and gender relations appear to be of little or no relevance. So basically the earlier theories, the earlier concepts used in international politics, they were not talking anything about gender. So they were almost gender blind. Because they were talking of the state, the interstate relations, the kind of anarchy, the kind of interdependence. So they were basically talking of the state, talking about the state and interstate relations, and the sexual politics and gender relations, that was not any concern to the mainstream theories or mainstream international relations scholars. Since the 1980s, however, feminist perspectives on world affairs have gained growing prominence. Now, as I said, it emerged basically as a theory only in the early 1990s. The end of the Cold War and the emergence of new theoretical debates set the broader context for the revitalization of feminist theories in international relations. So there were two major events. First was the end of the Cold War, and the second was the revitalization of international relations through different theoretical debates like constructivism, like postmodernism, like critical theory. So feminism was one of them, and it was also greatly influenced by the critical theories that emerged in the early 1990s. These two events, one global and the other disciplinary, together reduced the credibility of the mainstream IR theories. So one was the global development that the mainstream theories, they were not able to explain the peaceful end of the Cold War, and also the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the other was the disciplinary developments that they were mainly critical of the mainstream theories. So they reduced the credibility of the mainstream IR theories, and that happened in two important ways. Both the unexpected political alteration in the international system and the introduction of influential new actors in world politics required new forms of understanding and new methods of research. So there was, as I said, there was the end of the Cold War, so that nobody expected about the end of the Cold War, but that happened. And in a way, the end of the Cold War, that led to serious impact on the political landscape of international politics. And there were also new and important actors like non-state actors, transnational companies, supranational organizations. So these were also a new kind of development in the late 80s and early 90s. So these two types of developments contributed greatly for critical theories, and feminism was one of them. The feminist theory, which is considered as one of the most important critical theories, became the new method of inquiry. it is based on two central beliefs, like the women are disadvantaged because of their sex, and the other was this advantage can and should be overthrown. So these were the two main concerns of the feminists, that they were thinking that the women are disadvantaged because of their sex. So that was one concern. The other was because they are in disadvantaged position, and this disadvantage should be overthrown through new research, through new inquiry, through new kind of formulation. So that was their main concern. In this way, feminists have highlighted what they see as a political relationship between the sexes, the supremacy of men and the subjugation of women in most, if not all, societies. So that kind of politics of relationship, that was the great great kind of motivation for the feminists to focus on this issue. And they thought that the supremacy of men and the subjugation of women in many societies, that is a real challenge that all the feminists to seriously question the mainstream theories. Now, before understanding feminism as a theory, let us first focus on the main concepts which are used by the feminists irrespective of their differences in theoretical approaches. Despite the fact that there are different perspectives of feminism, the feminist discussions are centered upon particular terms and concepts which are considered helpful to show that the international system is constituted by socially constructed gender hierarchies triggering gender subordination to the detriment of the woman. So basically the concern was that if you look at the issue of gender, so as I said, the earlier international politics were gender blind, and they wanted to focus on this socially constructed gender hierarchy and how this gender hierarchy greatly contributed for gender subordination to the detriment of women. So that was their main concern. The first and foremost concepts used by the feminists are sex and gender. Although used interchangeably, the term sex refers to the two main biological categories like male and female based on their reproductive function. So basically, if you want to understand the difference between sex and gender, so sex refers to the biological differences between male and female, and this biological difference is understood in terms of their reproductive functions. The term gender, on the other hand, refers to the categorization of sexes like male and female on the basis of their social and cultural differences. So it's not the term gender is not based on biological differences, rather it is socially constructed. That is the main argument, and their position in the hierarchy. So how a particular culture, how a particular society understand the differences between the male and female, which is of course socially constructed. So that is the main focus. So that is the main difference, that of course there are biological differences, but how you understand those biological differences and what kind of role you are assigning to a particular sex, that was all socially constructed, and that was all politics. So the feminists particularly are interested for this kind of understanding, and that's why they use gender as the main category. Theoretization in international politics for formulating different concepts used in international politics, and they also challenge the policy making by using gender as a category, as a construction. The other terms broadly used by the feminists include patriarchy, hegemonic masculinity, masculinity and femininity. So these are the broad terms used by the feminists, and it would be better if you just understand the meaning of these terms. Patriarchy is a system in which females are subordinate to men in terms of power and status. So when we talk about patriarchy, so again it's a question of power and status. So those who are patriarchal, or a patriarchal system is based on the subordination of females in terms of power and status. In that respect, while masculinity signifies the qualities or attributes regarded as typical characteristics of men and manly behavior, femininity involves distinctive characteristics associated with women. So when you talk of masculinity, it basically refers to the qualities associated with men or associated with their manly behavior. But when you talk of femininity, it involves distinctive characteristics associated with women. Hegemonic masculinity maintains that international politics is such a thoroughly masculinized sphere of activity that women's voices are considered inauthentic. So when you talk of hegemonic masculinity, it basically talks about a sphere where the women voices are considered as something unauthentic, or they are not required at all, or they don't give any importance to the gender. Now let us focus our attention on the different waves of feminism. Now, the first wave of the feminist movement was observed in the 19th century, and it was concentrated basically on the fight for the same type of legal and political rights as men, such as the women's suffrage, equal opportunity rights, parenting rights, as well as rights related to marriage and the right to vote. So the early wave, or the first wave, was basically concerned about the same political rights as was enjoyed by the men, and that basically referred to women's voting rights, equal opportunity rights, parenting rights, and of course rights related to marriage and their rights to other kinds of that they considered as important as in comparison to the men counterpart. The second wave of feminism started in the latter part of the 20th century, particularly in the 1960s and 1980s, and it advocated not only for the guarantee of political rights, but also for strengthening of women's cultural and political presence in the society. So it was somehow much broader than the earlier wave, because it not only talked about different kinds of political rights, rather it focused on cultural and political presence in society, to acknowledge the role of women in the cultural sphere and also their political presence. It primarily focused on issues such as legal equality between men and women, and women's liberation movements with the theme of women liberation, inequalities in the workplace as well as family and reproductive rights. So these are the issues that were very important and was highlighted by the feminist scholars during the second wave of feminism. The third wave of feminism, on the other hand, covered the period of 1990s and the early 2000s, and criticized the fact that the first two waves of feminism were basically dominated by the white women from advanced capitalist society. So basically you will find that the third wave was a wave that challenged the concern of the earlier feminists, who were just talking of the problems faced by the advanced liberal capitalist countries. They were not talking of the problems of the countries belonging to global south or maybe the non-western countries. So that was the main focus of the third wave. However, emphasizing diversity and change, the third wave of feminism also aimed to work for correcting the mistakes made or failures faced during the previous phases, and it focused basically on the concepts such as globalization, post-colonialism, post-structuralism and post-modernism. So basically they were talking of the concerns of women, particularly in the global south, but at the same time they also tried to rectify the problems associated with the earlier two phases by focusing on concepts such as globalization, post-colonialism, post-structuralism and post-modernism. So now let me focus that although there are different approaches in feminism, but there are some common threads that bind these different approaches together. So feminist IR represents not only how international politics influences men and women, but also how it is influenced by them. So these are the two concerns of the feminist, that how international politics influences men and women, and also how it is influenced by these actors. So that is the main concern of feminism. There are different types of feminist approaches and debates in international relations. Although these typologies are useful as they present the perspective distinction between feminist approaches, yet all of them accommodate certain central components that can be regarded as common feminist traits. So there are differences, but despite those differences they agree on certain points, and that's why we consider all the approaches together, and we have included them under the single umbrella called feminism. These issues involve the centrality of gender in debates and discussions on feminism. So despite the differences, all agree or all focus on the centrality of gender in all the debates and discussions on feminism. The problematization of gender relations within the research framework. So how gender is problematized by the higher scholars. So that is again the concern of all the different approaches of feminism. The formulation of hypothesis that gender relations are not intangible. So gender relations are tangible, they are visible, so they can be seen, they can be understood, they can be analyzed. So that was also their main concern. The belief that feminism is a form of commitment to change and or transition. So basically they are not talking of status quo, they are highly critical of the status quo, and that is the reason why they criticize all the mainstream theories, and in a way they are advocating for change, they are advocating for. Furthermore, feminism in IR is also analyzed epistemologically within the two categories that we can say as empirical and analytical. So basically there are different approaches, they have different kinds of perceptions, they have differences on certain issues, despite that they agree on certain common points on the basis of which we will discuss each of the approaches. But one way to understand their contribution to international politics is to categorize them in epistemological terms, that is, one is empirical and the other is analytical. The feminist international relations through empirical and analytical epistemologies aims to deconstruct and transform the main IR theories and concepts formulated in a sexist manner, subordinating women to a secondary level. So basic aim is to deconstruct and transform the international relations theories and reformulate the concepts, because they are all very narrow, they are all designed in a very sexist way, and the consequence was that they all subordinated women to a secondary level. So that was the main concern. Now let us focus our attention on various approaches of feminism, starting with liberal feminism. The liberal feminism challenges the content of international relations, but not its fundamental epistemological assumptions. So you will find that they have problem with the content of international relations, but not the epistemological assumptions. They advocate that rights and representations conventionally granted to men may be extended to the women. So they just want equality, that whatever the men folks are enjoying, that should be given to the women. To correct gender inequality, liberal feminists focus on changing institutions, particularly increasing the representation of women in positions of power in the primary institutions of national and international governance. So because there is subordination, because nobody has accepted the women as a disadvantaged category, so basically they talk about giving them equal rights, giving them equal opportunities, and this can be done when you change the positions of power in the institutions of national and international governance. They also highlight the need to change laws to allow for women's participation, which they believe that it will correct the distribution of power between the sexes. So it is not that they want the governance institutions to focus on this, rather they wanted that there is a serious need to change the laws, because sometimes laws encourage the men folks to do something, it prohibits the women not to do something. If you look at the laws, they are also basically based on the concept of discrimination between the men and women. So the feminists, they wanted to correct this gender bias in the laws, and that can be done through when you focus on the changing the laws or reformulating the laws. According to liberal feminists, gender inequality is a major barrier to human development and also leads to greater incidence of war and violence. So if there is gender inequality in the society, that's a major barrier for human development, and also if there are more wars and violence in the society, in a way that is related to gender inequality. They lay stress on the importance of an individual and believe that every woman can assert her place in the society and gain the rights she deserves, such as abortion rights, equal pay for male and female employees, educational rights, voting rights, child care, health care, everything. So basically they talk of humanity, they talk of civilizational values, because they highlight the importance of the individual, and they think that if you focus on the individual, focus on the other half of the society, that will give them the kind of rights they deserve, and those rights are reflected in abortion rights, equal pay for male and female employees, educational rights, voting rights and so on. So, these are the rights that are needed from the perspective of liberal feminism, because they were talking of equality with the main folks. Liberal feminism rejects the claim that the inclusion of women in the power structure of the international society would change the nature of international relations. So, there was a apprehension, there was a fear that if women are given important positions in the national and international institutions or governance, that would change the nature of international relations. So, as I said in the beginning, they are interested in the content of international relations, not on the fundamental epistemological assumptions. On the contrary, they believe that their inclusion in the power structure would amount to comparable results. So, they want that if the women are included, more and more women are included in the power structure, that would definitely give better results to the society, to the country. Liberal feminists in that respect support the idea of integrating women into the male dominant fields such as foreign policy and the military. So, you can't reserve that these are male areas or these are female areas. So, they particularly oppose this kind of differences, and they advocated that if men can do something, female can also do the same thing. So, there is no distinction that this is military area reserved for the men folk and this is a non-military area where the female can be employed. So, that kind of distinction was not acceptable to the liberal feminist. Let us summarize what we have discussed so far. We discussed that the study of international relations has traditionally been gender blind, as the discipline has focused on states and interstate relations, not about sexual politics and gender relations as argued by the feminist scholars. Feminism as an international relations theory highlights the political relationship between sexes, supremacy of men and subjugation of women in most societies in international relations. Feminist discussions are centered upon particular terms and concepts like sex, gender, patriarchy, hegemonic masculinity and femininity. Then we discussed the stages of development of feminism, which are generally called as the waves of feminism, and there are 3 waves we discussed, although some scholars mention about 4 waves of feminism. Although there are different types of feminist approaches, they have some common traits. Liberal feminism, for instance, mainly argues that rights and representation conventionally granted to men be extended to women. In the next lecture, we will discuss some other feminist approaches. Thank you very much for your attention. We will meet in the next lecture. Till then, goodbye.